So hello everyone. I hope you can see my screen. Is it okay?
Yes.
I see a thumb up from Julie, so I feel safe. Okay. Hello everyone. We are very happy to welcome you all to this third webinar of Agroecology-Transect Horizon Europe projects. So just saying in introduction some words about our project. We started in September 2022 for 4 years, so which means that we are at month 20 now. What Transect means is transdisciplinary approach for systemic, economic, ecological, and climate change transitions. And our overall objective is really to lay the ground for agroecology as one of the future of farming in Europe by learning, engaging, and inspiring action. So my slide do not move. It's working. So on this map, so our goal really is, so we are in a climate call, but our mission is to contribute to unfolding the full potential of agroecology for European agriculture. But we're not only interested in climate. We have 3 pillars in the project, and we want to quantify the potential of agroecology for climate change adaptation and mitigation, but also for biodiversity conservation in farming ecosystems, and also for farm socioeconomic resilience. These 3 pillars are key for us. And for this, you have a map with our partners and with our innovation hubs. And we mobilize the knowledge of 11 innovation hubs that have been engaged in agroecological transition for more than 4 or 5 years. And you see where they are on the map. We call them innovation hubs. Maybe you are more familiar with the term living labs, which is quite similar, but we think that innovation hub better describes what we do. We are targeting innovations, and we are hubs because we meet in these hubs with scientists, farmers, farm advisors, NGOs, local policymakers. That's why we find that the term innovation hub is much clearer. And these 11 innovation hubs represent the diversity of European agriculture. We have 4 of them targeting arable land and annual cropping system, 1 in Hungary targeting perennial crops with research on vineyard and orchards, 1 in Slovenia targeting horticulture, 3 grass-based innovation hubs in France, Bulgaria, and in Switzerland, and 2 innovation hubs focusing on integrated crop livestock systems. One of these innovation hubs is in French West Indies in Guadeloupe, also to think on our islands that are related also to European agriculture. And we are a total of 19 partners. Those we are outside the innovation hubs are represented by these green triangles. Just some words on the Swiss Innovation Hub. So they are among the international leaders for understanding the benefits of forage mixture diversity. They are not only publishing scientific papers, this is the last one they published, but they also develop synergies with seed companies. And for example, they will talk to you today about certified mixture and this certified mixture, the gain from the certified mixtures are invested again in variety testing and in the development of new mixtures. And they are strongly involved in the science society dialogue. They are doing on-farm surveys to demonstrate management strategy to prevent some specific weed problems within these mixtures. And if you follow the QR code, you will have one of their online practice abstract. And they're also doing a lot of transfer. Today we call this a webinar because we speak in English and we are registered. We try to target a broad audience, but in the project we also develop masterclass that are held in person in local language. And since the start of the project, they already produced 3 masterclass with more than 200 attendees. And they also organize 3 field days with a huge number of visitors during these field days. And you see Andy explaining this research to the people who attend these field days. But also in Agroecology-Transect, we aim to be involved in science policy dialogue. Ultimately, we aim to provide a comprehensive set of scale-specific policy recommendations for unfolding the potential of agroecology in Europe, and based on scientific evidence and based also on the practical experience of our 11 innovation hubs. And especially in the case of Switzerland, there are some contrasting targets in lowlands and in uplands. In Swiss lowlands, the focus is more on the agroecological benefits of multi-species temporary grassland in crop rotation to reduce inputs, but also to preserve soil health and to increase soil resilience. While in uplands, the priority will be to develop new mixtures adapted to mountain condition and drought stress. And overall, the priorities in multifunctionality may be slightly different between uplands and lowlands. Overall, our objective target is that this certified diverse mixture become a key pillar, key element of Swiss agricultural policy. But Andy and his colleagues will say much more precise things on this, so I leave them the floor now. Thanks for your attention. And I've stopped sharing my screen like this, Andy. You can share in your own slide. Andy, we can see your slide, but you're muted.
So you see the slides? Okay. Then I would like to start my presentation. Good morning, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank to my colleagues, Julie Klötzli, Olivier Hühner, Matthias Sutter, and Daniel Sutter for the preparation and for the good work on this topic they do all the time. The contents of the presentation, do you see the heading or can I change something to? You see the heading?
We can see contents.
Okay, I can't see on my screen. Okay, yeah. So that's good. I plan to have 3 chapters. First, wine mixtures, their contributions to agroecology, and then give some spotlights about the results from research. So the first part is purely research, and then it's development, how to develop mixtures for farmers and how to implement these mixtures in practical farming. The mixtures can contribute in several ways to agroecology. I have here a list of the principles according to Wetzel and Dumont, where the mixtures can contribute. So first of all, and the most well-known is probably input reduction. Fertilizer use is reduced, concentrates are reduced in feeding of animals because the forage quality is so good. And pesticides can be reduced because suppression of weeds is very strong of mixtures. Then soil health, aggregate stability, microbiology, biomass in the soil, carbon stocks in the soil. Animal health, we have the possibility to add species with secondary metabolites. Biodiversity, in 2 ways, either species-rich mixtures to promote species richness, to promote biodiversity, but we can also exploit functional diversity. Then synergies, niche complementarity and symbiosis that we can exploit. Recycling, we can close the cycle of symbiotically fixed nitrogen on the farm and bring it to other fields. Resilience, mixtures are more resilient, more stable in yield and can adapt to drought conditions. And these mixtures are co-created together with farmers, seed companies, and so on. So all these principles are somehow in the topic of today. So why mixtures? First, I would like to say some points to the lay phase of when the mixture is growing itself. And then after that, on the whole farm or on the whole crop rotation, also some highlights. Most or some of the results come from the European-wide agrodiversity experiment. You see the sites where this experiment was carried out, all had the same plan of experiment. It was a common experimental design. What is important here compared to biodiversity experiments that were done in ecology, not with a mainly agricultural focus. The sites had to select their best forage species, and they had to select 4 functional types. 2 grasses, a fast and a slow growing but persistent grass, and a fast growing legume and a persistent legume. So these 4 species, these 4 functional types were in the experiment. Then the management was like in agriculture, so it was intensive cutting, it was fertilizing, also an important difference to biodiversity experiments. And we had 31 sites and a huge climatic gradient you see from Sardinia, Spain to Iceland and northern Norway. Then what is really important also is the experimental design. It was a design that is not yet that well known. We varied the species composition in the mixtures a lot. Each individual species was in some mixtures to a very low proportion, in others to a very high proportion, or in an equilibrated proportion. And what you see on the picture on the right side, it's a regression approach. And if I just show the regression line, on this slide here, you see the dots, the points, the measured points that are behind. So if I only show the regression line, there are a lot of points behind that are not always shown. And the huge advantage of this experimental design is that you can disentangle the effects of species richness, of species identity, and of species proportion in the mixture. That is usually not done in biodiversity experiments. They're most often only species richness is examined. So here we have really additional opportunities. And just in time for this webinar yesterday, the publication on these design principles, how you can work with them and how you can analyze them on R, was published. That's a long-lasting collaboration, and thanks to the whole author team that participated there. John Finn, the lead author, is also among us today. Now to the results. The mixtures can have a huge increase in yield. There is a huge potential. All the slides are represented the same way here. On the left-hand side, you have the grass monoculture, so 0% clover proportion. And then here on the right side, you have 100% of legumes and no grasses in the stand. So these are the monocultures. And in between, you have mixtures with an increasing legume proportion. And then here you see the response of the plant community. In this case, it is yield. And you see compared to the monoculture yield, the highest monoculture yield we had with these 4 species was this line here. The mixtures yield was much higher. That is one point, the huge potential yield increase. But what I think is, and the clover proportion matters. It's non-linear. But what is important for the implementation is this arrow here, the huge range, the broad range where the mixtures are better than the monocultures. So it's a system that is really robust. You have an advantage even if you have only 20% of legumes in your mixtures, or you have still an advantage if you have only 20% of grass in the mixture. That is very important for the farmer. He knows if he crops mixtures, he will get an advantage, even if he does not have an exact proportion of legumes in the sward. Then an overall result over the whole network, you can see here over the 31 sites. If we compare the yield of the mixture with the average monoculture yield, then the yield increase was 77%. This comparison is what is done normally in biodiversity experiments. There, the comparison is the average monoculture. For a farmer, however, the highest yielding monoculture is an important comparison. And you see that in this experimental network, we had nearly 20% more yield in the mixtures than in the best poor stand. You can also see that this was the case in all sites. You see here the 31 sites. You see very different growth conditions and a yield of 3 tons or 16 tons of the best monoculture. And you see that the mixtures, these are the circles, are most often above the best monoculture. This is a very special result because, as I told you, the mixtures are not the ideal mixtures, but these are 11 different mixtures with very different compositions. So there are also mixtures with very poor legume proportions, but still here again, it's very robust that the mixtures were always or most often better than the best monoculture. An important issue also is yield stability. You can see here the results of a comparable experiment with the monoculture 2 species and 4 species mixture under rain-fed control conditions and under drought stress. And the higher the value, the more stable is the yield. So the more species you have in your sward, the more stable is the yield. That's important for the farmers as their animals need forage all the time. Then the adaptation potential. You see 2 experiments, 2 studies where the mixture yield here, the dotted black line, is as high as the monoculture yield. The dotted line under drought stress, mixture under drought stress, has the same yield as the monocultures under rain-fed conditions, or in this study as well. Here in a bar chart, you see the 6 species mixture with forbs, legumes, and grasses, the yield, and then you see the average monoculture, even under rain-fed conditions, had a lower yield. So a big potential also for adaptation to bad climatic conditions. When I spoke about reduction of inputs, I spoke also, gave the example of herbicide. The reason is here. You see the biomass of unsown species in different plant communities. You see the monoculture of the fast developing grass, the persistent grass, the fast legume, and the persistent legume. And you see 11 different mixtures with very different compositions, very different relative abundances of the 4 species that were in the mixture. And you can see that the level of unsown species was much lower in the mixtures compared to the grasses, and even a much bigger difference compared to the legumes. And what is interesting also is the trend that during the 3 years the experiment lasted, the yield or the proportion of unsown species increased in 3 of the 4 monocultures, and in the mixtures it decreased over the 3 years. So very competitive plant communities, these mixtures suppressing weeds, allowing to reduce the input of herbicides. And this is probably really well known. That's the nitrogen saving potential, but it's a very impressive result, I would say. You have here the yield. The first one, the N150 kilograms line, was the line the green line on the first result slide I have shown you. On this site in Switzerland, we had also a very low nitrogen fertilization with only 50 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare and year. And we had a really excessive nitrogen fertilization treatment with 3 times the recommendation, that is 150 kilograms. So here we have a treatment that is really non-limiting for the grass pure stand. But what you can see is that mixtures with 50 kilograms of nitrogen get the same result if they had a quite high legume proportion. The same for mixtures with 150 kilograms of nitrogen at an already lower proportion of legumes. And that is why we have this yield saving potential. You see here the nitrogen fixation from the atmosphere these plant communities do. Again, depending on the legume proportion in the sward, you see in the beginning, you see what you would expect, a steep increase of nitrogen fixation with increasing legume proportion. But from a level of 50–60% of legumes, here you see that the effect decreases and that the legumes fix less nitrogen. Also here, big interactions among the species, very positive interactions in a way that a lot of nitrogen is fixed if the legume proportion is not very high in the sward. In addition to these up to 300 kilograms you harvest with your forage, another study found out that about 120 kilograms of fixed nitrogen goes to the stubble, the roots, and into the soil. So this is nitrogen that remains on the plot itself. So this is nitrogen and saving a lot of fossil fuel, because to fix 1 kilogram of nitrogen in industry with Haber-Bosch treatment, you need 2 kilograms of diesel, of oil. So you can see here that with a hectare of these plant communities, we can save up to 600 kilograms, 800 kilograms of fuel. That is quite a big contribution. Another contribution is that N2O emissions per ton of yield are reduced a lot if you have 6 species mixtures with a low level of nitrogen compared to poor grass sward with 300 kilograms of nitrogen. And now some results on Y mixtures on the crop rotation or the farm level. The first here is, again, that's the yield of the follow-on crop after the mixture or the monoculture. You see again here we had just grass as a pre-culture. Here pure legume stands, and in between the mixtures again with increasing legume proportion. And you see that we have in the follow-on crop a yield increase of about 30% in this study here. And then it leveled off. More legumes than 50–60% did not bring an additional advantage in this study. But an impressive yield increase, and that is transferred through the soil. So this must be the symbiotically fixed nitrogen, the stubble in the roots, and that was excreted to the soil. Then here a study in Switzerland in a network of farms where different crop rotations, plots and crop rotations were studied. We had crop rotations, or this Agroscope team had studied crop rotations with no temporary grasslands in the crop rotation, up to about 70% of temporary grassland in the crop rotation. And you see the bigger the proportion of temporary grassland with mixtures, typically in Switzerland, the more carbon stock you have in the soil. And you have this threshold here, the dotted line here, that's under permanent grassland. So you see that with a high proportion, you nearly reach the permanent grassland level, which is a very high level. This is not only important for climate change, carbon stocks, it's also important for climate adaptation because the water holding capacity is very tightly linked to the humus content in the soil. Then another study that was published, soil health, earthworm abundance was increased if there was temporary grassland in the crop rotation. Earthworm richness, microbial biomass, mycorrhizal fungi, soil aggregate stability. So many different positive effects on the soil health. And finally, on the whole farm, you remember the fixed nitrogen, that is the graph on the left-hand side. The animal is eating this and only 20% of this nitrogen is exported from the farm with the products, with milk and meat. And 80% are available again in farmyard manure. So it's important that we close this cycle with the farmyard manure, bring them back to either the grassland plots, or we can feed a lot also arable crops with this fixed nitrogen. So we can also save fertilizer in other crops. Now I would like to go to the development part. How do we develop such mixtures, and especially the mixtures for practical use for farmers? You remember the species selection in this agroecology, in this agrodiversity experiment, the best forage species and very different functional types. So the idea behind that was that we bring species together that really help each other in the mixed sward. But there are other studies or other combinations where there was no mixing effect or very poor mixing effect. So you can imagine if you mix two species that are functionally redundant, this will not bring a big advantage. And in our experiments, we also have not many, but we have some examples where there were negative mixing effects. So I just would like to highlight here that these convincing results do not mean automatically that every combination and every mixture is very good. We have really to do extensive testing, test a lot of combinations, and a lot of development is needed based on these basic research results that are around. And to produce the ideal mixture, I think there are 3 points that are important. We should start already with species or cultivars that have a very high yielding potential. So we start already on a high level for yield, and then we should combine species that maximize complementarity so that the green curve, the green line here, is as nonlinear as ever possible. That was the case in the results I have shown. That was mainly the case between grasses and legumes. It was also the case between legumes and forbs. It was less the case between grasses and forbs, and it was less the case between grasses and grasses and forbs and forbs. And last but not least, we have to design the seed mixture and the management of the mixture afterwards in a way that the range of the species abundances, of the species proportions in the mixtures are in a range where we have high yields. That is not always the case for farmers. They have other aims. It's important to realize that farmers may wish to have a mixture that has not 50% of legumes like here, but only 25 or 30% of legumes, because this brings other advantages in the management of the grassland sward. So a farmer would go for a mixture sometimes where the yield is not maximized, but the utilization is easier and has very different options. But you see again, with 1/3 of legumes, we already are quite near to the maximum yield. So the first step to do that is the plant breeding. That is, I mentioned this because we aim to start with really high-yielding, disease-resistant species or cultivars, with cultivars that have a high forage quality. All these things are optimized through plant breeding worldwide. Then we have in Switzerland the second step, that is cultivar testing. We do cultivar testing on 5 to 6 sites. They are under very different growth conditions, lowland to mountain regions, managed under conventional farming and organic farming. These experiments are in the field for 3 years because the leys are cropped 2 to 3 years, some even longer. And it's a huge effort. You see such plots in the pictures on the right side, and automatic harvester weighing the yield directly in the field. That is absolutely needed because these are nearly 8,000 plots that are managed like this, and they are cut and harvested 5 times a year. You can imagine that's a huge effort behind all that. In this second step, cultivar testing, many different purposes of the cultivars are tested or examined. It's the yield, it's the overwintering capacity, it's the persistence, it's the forage quality, and the disease resistance. And again, these many parameters make clear that this is a huge effort, but what you can see here on this slide is it's worth this effort. You see a very good cultivar on the right-hand side, and you see a bad cultivar in the third year of cropping on the left-hand side, and you see some individual big plants here. That's the originally sown cultivar. The small, the low-growing green parts in between are foreign species, so it's much worse than the green color would indicate here. And from this step, then the list of recommended cultivars is produced. This is the first key document in the whole process. And forage quality and disease resistance are very important things, persistency also. So it's not only the yield in the first or the second year, it's a very broad and ecological judgment of the cultivars. Then the third step is the development of mixture. We start this in small plot experiments. You see these a picture of such an experiment here. Some ideas about mixtures are around. Then you produce different seed mixtures where you put different species together in different proportions, and these are tested in these small plot experiments with scientific standards, with repetitions, with randomization, and out of that we find the best candidate mixtures. So at the moment we have 35 mixtures that are tested. They are tested on 3 lowland sites and on 5 mountain sites. That is what actually is going on. And then the fourth step, and that is quite unique, I would say, in Switzerland, and is part of the very good transdisciplinary collaboration or intersectoral collaboration. We test the best candidate mixtures from the small plot experiments also in big plots on farms. So these mixtures are sown in 10 by 50 meter plots on farms. They are sown adjacent to each other in stripes, as you can see on the picture here. And the only thing the farmer has to do is to crop across the lines as they were sown. All the other things, the farmer is completely free. It should be a real test under real practical conditions. The farmer should manage as he often does, and the farmer should also be allowed to do mistakes. It's interesting to see whether the mixtures are robust under these real practical conditions. At the moment, we test 10 such mixtures on 10 different farms in 7 different regions in Switzerland. That is a tight collaboration of Agroscope, the Research Institute, the Swiss Grassland Society, and the Swiss Seed, the Swiss Association for Seed Trade and Plant Breeders' Rights. So that's illustrating the collaboration among research, extension, and the market. And the last point I would like to mention is the implementation. And here I would tell about the situation as we have it in Switzerland, because I think that's really a nice example, and it's a pleasure to work here where such a good collaboration exists. I have the same picture with the last step of development. This last step of development, the on-farm trials, that's in the same time the first step of implementation of public relation of knowledge transfer. And this is the case because we often select farms with on agricultural schools or farms on extension centers in Switzerland. And the reason for that is that then the teachers can go with their kids to these fields and show the mixtures. Extension persons can show farmers these mixtures. They are there, they are available, the mixtures, they can be used in field days, and like this, farmers know about these mixtures. So that's why I say that's also the first step of implementation. And then the next step is that the best mixtures that were candidate mixtures after the small plot experiments and that made the step of practical testing and were the best there, they are in this document. Then they are published in these standard mixtures for forage production. This is the second key document beside the recommended list of cultivars. And in this document, all these seed mixtures are documented with the exact composition of the seed mixtures. So which species are in there and how many grams of each species are in there in the mixture. And what I think is important here is that this system of mixtures has really a clear design. It's not too complicated for the farmers to select mixtures, and the design of how this is done, I try to explain here. The first thing that is important is the duration of the mixture. So the farmer selects first of all according to the duration. We have mixtures for 1 year, for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and longer. That is the first point. Then the second point that is very important is the legume that is in the mixture, because the legume has a huge effect on how these mixtures can be utilized. It is important to know that only trifolium repens can be highly intensively cut or can be grazed. All the other legumes we have, whether this is red clover, whether this is lucerne or sainfoin, they cannot be grazed and they can only be cut in a medium or low intensity. So the selection of the mixture type according to the legume that is in is very important for how the farmer can utilize these mixture. On this slide here, you see that the first three examples, the 2 years mixture, the 3 and the 4 years mixture for production, they are done in a way that they exploit functional biodiversity, that species fit together. They are not very rich in species. They have 2 to 9 species, but the species are selected in a way that they fit well to each other. It's also not the aim to mimic a permanent natural grassland. It's really for production, and all the species that are in are represented by cultivars. Then we have also species-rich mixtures. That is the pillar on the right-hand side for promotion of biodiversity. Here there are 30 to 70, 47 species in the mixture, and all the species are represented by ecotypes sampled in semi-natural grasslands in Switzerland. So very different mixtures for very different purposes on the level of production or promotion of biodiversity, and also on the level of utilization for the farm. And for the recognition of these mixtures and the selection of the farmers, we have the 3 points, as I said. First, it's the duration. Second, it's the legume species. And third, it's the site conditions. The mixture is cropped. We have from the Swiss Grassland Society the quality label. This quality label has different colors according to the mixture type. That helps also the farmer to recognize the correct mixture, that he can select the correct mixture. And I would like to go through some of these mixtures just to introduce these mixtures to you, that you have a clearer idea on some very specific mixtures, that you see how they vary to allow the farmers to find what they really need. The first is a mixture that is used for only 2 years, the sowing year and 1 year of utilization. It's for short gaps in the crop rotation. There are mixtures with more species, but here I selected that one with the lowest species richness, only 2 species. It's red clover and Lolium multiflorum. Both species develop very, very fast after sowing, so that's ideal for a crop gap, for a short gap in the crop rotation. And they produce a lot of yield already in spring, early in spring, so farmers can have a full yield cut before they are sowing silage maize. And what you see in the corner below here, it's a diagram whether the mixture is adapted to wet conditions or dry conditions, and what is the aim for the legume proportion here. The clover proportion would be about 50% in the seed mixtures, and it's for intermediate to more wet conditions. Then we have an example of a 3 years mixture here with Medicago sativa, lucerne, as the main legume. You see that's for 3 years, it's for drought resistance, and it's for farming for symbiotically fixed nitrogen. It's a mixture used in dry sites in Switzerland. Most sites are too wet for this mixture, but some regions need such mixtures, and it's used in organic farming because it fixes a lot of nitrogen. You see here the main species is lucerne, and then you have grasses in there that are also adapted to dry conditions. Should be utilized only 4, probably 5 times, cannot be grazed. The recommendation is not to fertilize any nitrogen fertilizer, and the reason for that is the aim is to have about 70%, 2/3 of legumes in these mixtures. So they don't need fertilizer, they can fix all their nitrogen themselves. They have also some restrictions in conservation of the forage. It's more difficult to produce hay because the stems dry very slowly and the leaves dry very quick. It's difficult to find the ideal moment when you bring in the forage. Then a very special mixture that is with Onobruchis vicifolia. They contain a secondary metabolite, contains tannins. They are good for animal health against parasites and against nitrogen losses. They are also active, these condensed tannins. So we have a mixture that would cover these needs, but that's really a very small niche. Until now, it's quite recent that we put that in. But there are some problems. Onobruchis can be cut only 3 times a year. It's not for intensive management. So it's really not a production aim, it's more an animal health aim if a farmer crops this. And it's sometimes difficult to fight against weeds because the competitive ability of Onobruchis is quite low. And to finish, I have 2 examples of these grass white clover mixtures. So as the name says, in all the other mixtures, we name first the legume. So it's red clover mixture, it's lucerne mixture, or is sainfoin mixture. But here we call it grass legume or grass white clover mixture. And the reason is that the grass proportion should be higher. The legume proportion we aim is about 1/3, and 2/3 are the grasses. And the reason for that is it's really much simpler to manage these swards. They can be grazed. It's easy for conservation of the forage. It's really a very broad range of utilization. And that is why these types of mixtures are the most, make the far biggest proportion in the mixtures that are sold in the market. Here we have a first example where Trifolium repens and Lolium perenne are dominating. So Lolium is the key grass species here. That's for really favorable conditions. And we have also mixtures, and I told you before, the third criterion of the selection of the mixture is the site conditions. We have the same type of mixtures, but with more robust grasses that are more important than in this mixture. Here an example with Festuca rondinacea and Albicurus pratensis. Again, a lower level of white clover, but other grasses for more difficult conditions. So like this, we hope to offer the farmers mixtures that cover all their needs. And finally, for ecological compensation areas or biodiversity promotion areas, these long-term mixtures, these are now done according to how semi-natural grasslands are looking like. We have different such mixtures. This example here contains 47 species, 9 legumes, 9 grass species, and 29 forb species. They should be cut only twice a year, not fertilized, and they can be utilized for hay production, has a quite low forage quality, but the purpose is a different one. And people that will participate in 2 weeks in the co-innovation workshop here in Switzerland, we will have on the excursion the opportunity to cover also this topic of these biodiversity mixtures. Then the next step is involvement of the stakeholders. This is mainly done through the Swiss Grassland Society. This is an umbrella organization of the grassland professionals in Switzerland. So farmers, extension services, agricultural schools, research, seed industry, university, and applied university. All these institutions or type of people are represented in the governing board of the Grassland Society. That's the strategic board of the society. And then the Grassland Society is a nationwide organization. In Switzerland, you know about the different language regions we have. We have 3 sections of the Grassland Society, one in the German-speaking, one in the French-speaking, and one in the Italian-speaking part of Switzerland. And each of this section has its own practitioner board. So there are mainly farmers and extension people in this practitioner board, and this practitioner board brings in the needs of farmers, brings in what should be done in the work program, what should be done in experiments, and the whole society has about 2,300 members. The Grassland Society awards a quality label to seed mixtures if they have a very high quality, and seed mixture gets the right for this quality label if only the best cultivars are in the seed mixtures. So that's the recommended cultivars from the first key document I mentioned. Then the mixture recipe should be according to the published recipes in the standard mixtures of Switzerland to get this quality label, and then the seed quality has to be very high, and that is tested from time to time. So one aim is the quality of the seed mixtures, that not cheap mixtures with bad plants are sold, but really high quality mixtures. And the second aim is the easy recognition and the correct selection of the mixture type by the farmers, as I told you before, with the color code and the names of these different types of mixtures. The participation of the seed companies to use this quality label and to pay a little bit for the quality label, because with each package of seeds that are sold, a small fee goes back to research to develop new mixtures. So this participation is completely voluntary. Nevertheless, about 3/4 of the seeds that are sold in Switzerland are sold as mixtures with this quality label. So we do not sell mixtures for poor stands, and we mainly sell seeds for mixtures, and these mixtures are most often with the quality label. So the research work and the development work really feed directly in the practical farming like this. Then step number 8 in the whole process is, if you have such a quality label that people believe in it, you have, of course, also to check whether the conditions are fulfilled. That's the reason why we take some samples from the seed companies. We are testing whether the seed quality is correct. We are testing whether the seed composition of the mixture is correct. And we are even sowing out the individual species to see whether the cultivar that is in the seed mixture is one of the recommended cultivars that you see in the picture on the right-hand side. And the very last step, also very much pushed by the Grassland Society, is that leaflets are produced to really explain about these mixtures, to give practical ideas and recommendations how to farm these mixtures. And that is, of course, also promoting the use of mixtures. And as a conclusion over all this, I would say multi-species mixtures combine the potentials for reduced inputs of resources, for higher productivity, for a lower risk of environmental problems, and for the adaptation of varying growth conditions, probably more adverse conditions in the future. And the participatory system we have here that combines education, research, development, industry, extension, and the farmers is highly successful for implementing these multi-species mixtures into practical farming. With this, I would like to thank you for joining this webinar and for your attention. It was a pleasure to prepare this and to have you here as an audience. And if you have questions or discussion points, you are welcome. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
We already had some question in the chat, Andy, if you're ready. So the first one was from Jan Wilkinson. Do you have any data on the % of ley containing diverse mixture across Switzerland? What change have you seen over the years?
We have, now I'm not sure, Ian, whether you address these biodiversity promotion mixtures or whether you address all the mixtures.
I think it was at the beginning of the presentation, and I think it's, if I understood correctly, compared to monoculture.
We have a long tradition in Switzerland for mixtures, so it's not a huge increase in the use of mixtures because the first publication of standard mixtures was in 1955, and there was a revision every 4 years, and these mixtures were adapted to the practical use or needs of the farmers. So more extensive species like Dactylis glomerata, Arenata rumeratius, they were reduced in the mixtures, and more intensively managed species like white clover, Lolium perenne, hybrid ryegrass, as other examples, they increased a lot in the mixtures. So that is a change that we have over all this time. We have had also an increase of these mixtures with red clover, the 2 years mixtures, because of cropping of silage maize and shorter gaps in the crop rotation. But overall, the time in the last 2 or 3 decades, these grass legume mixtures were about 2/3 of the sold mixtures. So that's by far the biggest proportion of mixtures, and it's we have such grass legume mixtures with white clover for 3 years and for longer duration. Those with the longer durations are more complex in their composition, but these two together made about 2/3 of the mixture sold. I hope that answers your question.
There were also a question from Ellen Sizer Coverdale. The experiment was for yield component. However, were there any plots that were used to investigate persistency or even simulated grazing?
Was that in the very beginning? Was that the agrodiversity experiment?
I think it was maybe for the cultivar testing or
okay, yeah,
the cost experiment.
The cultivar testing, that is always going on for 3 years because persistency is an important part, and the results of the last year is always a very important result for us. We have also the mountain sites because the experience shows that these rougher growth conditions are very helpful to find persistent species or cultivars because growth conditions are more harsh. So 3 years there is probably what would be 5 years or 4 years in the lowland. That is what concerns cultivar testing. Grazing is a very difficult thing in cultivar testing. We have a simulated grazing with very frequent and very low cuts to mimic grazing we know that there are some countries where cultivars are also tested under real grazing, but we think that's a very difficult thing to do, especially because of the choice of the animals. If animals like one cultivar more than another one, this cultivar is much heavier treated, and then the comparison is not fair. And you would lose the cultivar that you would like to have because it's liked by the grazing animal. What concerns the basic research results, there we had also such mixture experiments in other European project that was multi-sward. There, these mixtures were tested under grazing, and we got the same results as under cutting as presented from the agrodiversity experiment.
We have a question from Cora Schouten. For cultivars in diverse crop system, I could imagine that certain characteristics are preferred, while not so important in monoculture. For example, interspecific competition. You mentioned that you are only testing cultivars that are high yielding in monocrops, but could you imagine that cultivars that are not the highest yielding in monocrops do perform better in intercropping?
That's a very good question, and I like that question because I did my postdoc on this topic. We are testing all the cultivars also under competition. This I did not mention. Thank you for the question. That was a mistake. So we have the monoculture plots in cultivar testing, and then all the grass species that are tested are also tested in mixtures with legumes, and all the legume cultivars that are tested are also tested not only in monoculture but also in mixture with grasses. These are standard treatments, and like this we find also the species or the cultivars that are really competitive. But most often it's really a high correlation. High yielding species is also a species that is really competitive in a mixed plant community. And of course, these mixtures are for production, for high yields. There, I think the yielding ability is very important. In the biodiversity mixtures, it's a different case.
Thanks a lot. We have a question more on the strip trials from Shintaka Jaya Singhe. Great presentation. Please explain a bit about how you control weed invasion when you are testing your mixtures at the farm level.
We don't control weeds. It's really the practical farming, and weed, or let's say weed control is done if it's really a problem with dog Rumex very early in the sward. After sowing, they can be sprayed, but all the other weeds normally disappear with the time of the mixture is in place. I just studied or saw results from a monitoring event in Switzerland. Grasslands have pesticide interventions 0.006 times per year. So it's very, very low, very, very rare that plant protection is done in grassland in Switzerland. And all these applications are against weeds, are with herbicides. All the other products are not allowed in grassland. So rare occasions where weeds are sprayed directly after sowing, but afterwards it's probably manual or single plant treatment of dock, but generally no weed protection apart from that.
And again, a question about the strip trials with a real life experiment. How do you record mixtures performance on the big plot? And do you have any example of mixture that were promising, but they partly failed under this testing?
So I think that question you should answer, Julie, at least the first part, and the second part probably Daniel. We are doing that work presently.
Yes, we go on farm with the farmer or the school teacher, and we record visual estimation of the different mixture. We record the gaps in the sward, the percent of clover, of grasses and forbs present, if there is any weed infestation, but also we gave an estimation on how good the mixture is. It's not objective. There are some kind of subjectivity within. And we also record the visual estimation on the different species presented. We had a campaign on the presence of tetraploid and diploid Festuca pratensis. And there we took also botanical sample to see how many sown species were able to establish.
Okay, about mixers that have failed. The idea of these trials is that we, in the small plots, we have about 12 to 16 maximum different mixture recipes, variants. And out of these, up to 16, we will test 4 to 6 variants then in the strip plots. And of these, usually only one will survive. And it is, in this case, is also not sure that we get one. Usually we hope to get one out of these 6 tested in practice, but it may happen that we do not get any. So in last years we had no case where we lost all the mixtures or where all the mixtures we tested in practice were bad, but we can't say or the result is open when we start with these practical trials. So it may happen sometimes. We wouldn't be astonished when once in a while we won't get a mixture out of it. But in the last years we had at least for these mixtures we adapted, and also for these we newly developed, we had no cases where we completely failed. But I think it's also some sort of you can't plan all the cases. So we know that we may once in a while have no result. So it's a lot of empirical work in it. That's why we're doing these trials, and that's why we go on farm to make sure that what we have seen in our trials in the small plots really delivers what it promised. Yes.
Thanks a lot. We have a question from Marie McAvoy. In your national trials, you have a big difference between sites like lowland and mountains areas. Do you see much change in the rank performance for yield between varieties cultivar at the different sites?
Oh, that again, I have to hand over to Donny.
This is a difficult one. But in some sort, yes, you have the big differences, but we do not test all the species at high altitudes. So let us say lowland perennial, to test it at 1850 meters above sea level at our northern latitude of 48, almost 48 degrees. It's a little bit too tough. So with perennial ryegrass, for example, we go up to 1,000 meters above sea level, and they have some differences. So it's a known aptitude for cultivation at higher altitudes. It's ability. It's a known criterion in the variety testing. It's not just only that we get some persistency or the persistence data. It's also really which gives us hints, and that's why we have some differences which you won't see at the in the lowlands. So it's important for us to have this information too, because for example, perennial ryegrass at higher altitudes of about 1,000 meters, there is the cultivation limit. And when you have mixtures where you are using perennial ryegrass as a starter, which will disappear after a certain time when more persistent grass species are taking over, you should know which variety fits to these higher altitudes. So we have differences between lowland and upland. Depends on the variety, on the species.
Thanks a lot, Danny.
Julie, one moment. I have just to explain why I hand over these questions to Donny and Julie. Donny is the guy in our group responsible for the whole cultivar testing. He is doing this in the German-speaking part of Switzerland, and Rainer Frick, who is also with us, is doing this in the French-speaking part. So these two are the persons that are really in the field and see the results and are the key persons to answer such questions. And Julie is with us in this Agroecology-Transect experiment, and one important task she is doing there is to manage these stripe trials on farm. And thus again, she is really involved in it and sees it in the field. That's why I hand it over to her.
We have two questions from Bertrand. The first one is about there is a number of legume and forb species that are important feed resources for bumblebees and wild bees. Do you plan to, or did you already evaluate the potential of your multi-species mixture for providing pollination services?
We did not, but we plan to do that. We are in a European project called Legendary that works on persistent perennial legumes and on different ecosystem services of them. And one ecosystem service would be pollinators. And we are sowing the experiment tomorrow, if everything went well, and we'll start with the measurements next year.
The second question from Bertrand, do you have any feedback from farmers on how this mixture secure their system? Does it leave them more opportunities to preserve multi-species natural grassland on other plots of their farm with wider benefits for biodiversity and sea sequestration in pasture soil?
We just can see what farmers are doing and interpret this. I think what is going on is, since these ecological compensation areas or biodiversity promotion areas and payments for them were implemented, it is splitting up, that we have intensively managed grasslands and really extensively managed grasslands. That's good for biodiversity, and if we have higher yields in these lays, of course, then the farmers can have more animals or bigger proportion on their farm for biodiversity conservation areas. What we see is that farmers have much more biodiversity conservation areas than they need to have. The rule is that they need to have 7% of their farm area to get direct payments for their whole farm. And if I'm not wrong, the average in Switzerland is about 15% they have. So it's good yield and management of the intensive part allows them to have a bigger share of ecological compensation areas than they would have, than they would need to have.
We still have one question from the chat from Walter Rossing. Bertrand mentioned that mixture will be a key pillar for Swiss policy on agroecology. That sounds like resonating with the Agroecology-Transect project aims. Can you elaborate a bit on that? Any other element beyond mixtures?
I don't really understand. So what are other issues of agroecology in Switzerland than mixtures? Is that the question?
No, I think so. How do you see the mixture as being a key pillar for the Swiss policy on agroecology? And do you see any other element beyond mixture that could help the transition to agroecology? That's how I understood the question.
I think mixtures are really important for the health of crop rotations. And we have really good conditions in Switzerland for this situation. Other elements there are many that go in this direction in the whole agro policy. I mean, there are these ecological compensation areas, mostly on permanent grassland, semi-natural permanent grassland, but also with these species-rich mixtures that I have mentioned. So some arable land that was formerly intensively managed is sown with these species-rich mixtures and are then for biodiversity promotion and get payments for that. There are other issues, for example, an equilibrated nutrient balance that you have to have on a farm. That prevents that if a farmer does an area for biodiversity promotion, that he increases infinitely the intensity of the remaining area. And so that there is not a negative effect of the biodiversity promotion areas. Then we have some programs in cropping of cereals with less plant protection products. So there are many different such incentives through direct payments to bring farmers to more ecological farming.
Thanks a lot, Andy.